All right, welcome back. In this video, we're going to take a look at doing a little bit of refactoring of our ERISA character, making a base class that has some common behavior. This will make it easier when we go forward and make additional characters that you can choose from. We won't have to be recreating the same behavior over and over again. It'll make it much simpler. And then we're going to proceed with starting to build up our character stats and how those all work. And so I hope you enjoy the video. And I'll see you in a second. All right, welcome back. Whoa, we're flying a little bit fast here. Let's turn that down. So, we are back for another Unreal Engine video. And, there we go. That's a little quicker. So what we're going to work on today, you know what, I'm gonna get rid of these doors. They're just kind of in the way, and we got other stuff that we're going to be doing. What we're going to work on today is our character organization a little bit. We're going to create some new blueprints that are going to be base classes. We're going to refactor ERISA and get her basic behavior out of this blueprint and into a top level blueprint. So up here in my characters folder, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call blueprints. That's going to apply to all characters, ERISA, and any additional ones that we make, and they'll be in their own folders just like that one is. And I'm going to I'm going to copy this ERISA blueprint right here. I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to call it player character base. This will be the base class of all player characters, and we're going to do a save all so that we don't have difficulties here. And now with this blueprints folder over here, I'm going to take this player character base and I'm going to drag it over into this blueprints that's under the characters, and I'll say move there, and there it goes. Okay, good. So now under this blueprints, we've got this player character blueprint. We're going to do a couple of quick modifications to it. We're going to go here to this and details. Well, wait a minute, we're going to go to the mesh, and we're going to reset this because we don't want it default in there. And here in animation class where it says ERISA anim BP, we're going to set that to none. And everything else in here is fine. We're going to compile and save that. This now has all of the basic behavior of a player character, including some of this stuff and some additional components we're going to add to this very shortly. Now, one last modification over here in ERISA, the ERISA blueprint. I'm going to go back here and hit save all. Yeah, everything's good. In the ERISA blueprint, we're going to go to class settings up here, and over here where it says parent class's character, we're going to change that to the one we just created, player character base. There it is. And ERISA herself, oh, actually, you know what, before we do that, you know what, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to autosave ERISA BP. I'm going to change that back, go to class settings. I'm going to go to character. I'll set that to character. It's reparented to character. I'm going to get rid of all of this specialized behavior, all of this movement behavior in the ERISA BP class because she no longer needs it. And I'm going to get rid of these because they're no longer needed. And this is all inherited. And I'm going to now get rid of these variables because they will be inherited. And we're going to change their make some other changes. So we compile and save that. Now we can go to class settings and type in player character base, and now the camera boom and the Arisa camera is inherited. Okay, that's fine. We're going to go back to here, our player character base. We're going to change this, remove this name. We're just going to call it camera. We've got a camera boom and a camera. If we go back to Arisa now, you'll see she inherited camera. That's good. And these are still here, and she's not inheriting those. What we're going to do is change these. Kill this. We're going to change them. We don't expose on spawn, expose cinematics category, replication. We don't need to worry about that. Instance editable. Yeah. These are mostly just used in here. I'm not sure. I don't think those need to change at all. Let's go back here and hit save all, save selected. The Arisa BP still has her assigned. If we go here to the mesh, she's got her assigned mesh. Camera boom camera. Let's double check that. Animation. Go here. ANIM. There it is. It's still got all that. So it should be working. And it is working. Jumping. Can we walk? Yep, we can walk. And we can sprint, can we? I haven't set up sprint. Okay. So what have we got now? We have a character Arisa BP that's based upon this character here. So now here in this blueprints under just characters is where we're going to start creating some additional components that Arisa will inherit because they will be part of this component. And we're going to go here and do a check-in. Added Arisa, or added player character base class. Submit. I'm going to get rid of that plus. Okay. So now what do we need? Well, what we want to work on is character statistics and the health and these kinds of things. So we need to be able to determine, you know, what our character can do, what their abilities are, and so forth. So let's begin with the character stats. So what I'm going to do is come up here into blueprints, and I'm going to go to here and create a, actually I'm going to start with an enumeration. And we're going to call this stat IDs. These are going to be the identifiers that we use for each of our stats. It's going to make it a little easier to so here in the enum, a little bit easier to understand which stat we're looking at, because we're going to set up the stats in a way that they're a little flexible and have some capabilities to them. So almost all such games have a stat called strength. Oh, this is the description. Character stat IDs. That's good. So up here under the enumeration part, what an enumeration is, it's just a list of named values that have a numerical value. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's add 7 of them. And I'm going to pause the video to bring up some other information, and I will be right back. Okay, and we're back. So we've got the first one is going to be strength, and I just kind of picked a few that I like. You can use whatever kinds of names you want for yours, and you can set up your rules any way you want. But what we're going to do is plug these into here. Fortitude, Constitution, Perception, and we'll add in luck. So these are just some basic ideas of stats. We have some strength, agility, stamina, fortitude, constitution, perception, and luck. Those are the names of our stats. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a struct here, and the way a struct is created. So that's an enumeration. It's just a list of named values that allows us to pick those and identify things. So now I'm going to go here to blueprints, and I'm going to create a struct, and we're going to call this struct stat. It represents a single player statistic. All right. So this very first one that we're going to have is just going to be the name, and it's going to be of type text, and that's so that we can have a readily available thing to display on our screen, and we'll put the name of the stat in there as text. And the next one it's going to have is an ID, and its type is going to be that stat ID IDs that we just created. It's going to be of that type, so we can assign those. The next thing we want is a value. Every stat, of course, has to have a value, and that value is going to be an integer value. It's just going to be a value 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it may be. So we'll create another one. Now, this is going to be called plus up. And this is when the character does certain things, they get experience, they make levels, they can get points, which they can go in and add to any stat that they want to add those points to. And that's also going to be an integer. And then we're going to have, let me pull this down a little bit. The next one we're going to have is a thing called a modifier. Now, a modifier can be positive or negative. It can give you something good against a particular stat, or it can reduce it. This is different than plus up, though, because it's linked to this thing I'm calling modifier time, and this is going to be a float. And so when a modifier gets applied, a time will also be set, and so for some period of time that modifier will last, and this time will run down, and when it gets to 0, that modifier goes away. And there's going to be a function associated with this that's going to calculate the total value of this, which will be the value plus the plus up plus any modifier. And when the time runs out, of course, then the modifier will be set to 0. So this is a structure that represents a single stat. Let's save this and go back over here. So now we want to create a blueprint class. And this blueprint class is going to be based on actor component. This is important. Don't use scene component. Use actor component. This will allow us to place it into the components list of a blueprint, but it says it's not something that displays in the scene, and that's what we want, an actor component. And we're going to call this stats component. All right, let's open this up now, and you notice there's no place to put like additional stuff in here. This is a component that goes into a blueprint, so this blueprint is what it is there. All right, the first thing that we need in here is some variables, and the most obvious thing that we need is our attribute. We'll call this attributes, and its type over here is going to be attribute Did I call it attribute struct or just... what did I call it? All right, let's go back and look. Oh, not attribute, stat. Okay. So this is going to be, we're going to call this stats. And we'll pull this down and we'll look up stats. Not stats component, stat. Just stat. And over here next to stat, the stat type, is this little button, and we pull it down and you'll see here array. That turns it into an array of those stats. And if we compile now and we come down here, and the default value has 0 elements. So this is where we want to create each one of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 of them. And if we pull this down, that one's already on strength. If we open this one up, this is the next one, agility. This is the next one, stamina. Let's close these up. And what comes after stamina is fortitude, 4. This one will be constitution, 5. This one will be perception, and 6. This one will be luck. All right. Those are basically set up. We can set a default value in here, or we can have some way of randomizing it. For now, I'm going to set 10 into each of those. And I'll just pop these open real quick and set in 10. 2. Come on. 2. We'll pop this in. 3. 10. 4. 10. But we can set up, when we set up our character selection process, we may apply some random values to these initially, and then give the character maybe some random points, or the player rather, some random points that they can apply to those. Now, we can set up the display name. It's just a matter of typing the name that you want to be able to display on the screen. We're not going to be working with the display just yet, so I'm going to leave the display name alone. We'll come back to that and set those when we decide how we want to display those and maybe what we want to say there. So far, so good. Now, there's a variety of functions that we need. And some other variables that go with this. So these are some variables that aren't directly related to any one stat. They're related to the character kind of overall. So they're not part of the stat structure. They're just variables here in this component. And they are points, but points is not an array of those. It's an integer. And it's not an array. It's just a value. So I'm changing that. And now a new variable, and I'll explain what these are. This one will be experience. These are basically your experience points. A new variable here will be called level. That's whatever your current level is. It's based on experience points. And because we're going to have a formula going, I'm going to put another variable in here called leveling constant. This is used for the leveling calculation, and then another one, and one more variable. No, not a new function. We'll come back to that. No, not a new macro. We delete these. Delete that. Delete that. We want a new variable. And this final variable is we're going to call it prev, P-R-E-V, prev level. And we're going to use these in some calculations very soon here. So let's talk about some of the very basics. I basically want all of this stuff to be kept more or less hidden away here. they're you can get them, but they're not writable. And the way we're going to get them, though, you really don't. Nobody has any need for to get the stat structure or any of this information. We'll have getter functions, which essentially, well, let me explain it this way. Let's do points first. We do need to get the points from here, but we don't want. We want to set them in accordance with very specific rules. So we don't want them to be settable from the outside, so they're not accessible. In fact, points probably should be made. No, it's got to be accessible to the possibly to the derived classes. So we're going to go up here to functions, and we're going to create a function, and I'll show you how I do this. We're just going to call this one first get experience, okay? And all it's going to really return is a value. It's not going to give you access to change this. It's just going to give you the value of the experience. There will be a way to add experience. We're going to do a function for that as well. So if we want to get the experience from this, we need an output. So over here in this pane, there's this output. We're going to click this plus, and for this output of this function, we're just going to call it exp is fine. Now let's call it experience. And since experience itself is an integer, we'll make it an integer, and we'll just grab experience and drop it onto here. And now we have a function that gets the value of the experience without giving you direct access to modify this. So the next thing we're going to do is create this function called add experience. So this will allow you to the outside world, whatever's going on, to add some experience to the character for some action. And so what we'll do is create another function, and we'll call it add experience. And I'm not creating a function that allows you to take away experience. Once you get experience, you've got it. It's yours, and you keep it. So add experience is really very simple. We're going to have an input, and we're going to call it experience to add, and it will be an integer just like the other ones, and we have an output called, we'll call it new experience. This just makes it convenient that you're going to get associated with this the new value that's after you've added them together. So we're just going to take experience over here, get it, take this, add it, integer to integer, plug this into here. Then we're going to call take experience and drop it on here, and we get a setter. Bring this across, and now we have set the experience to the old experience plus the new experience. And one last thing to do is to return the result. And now we've got a way to update experience, add experience to it, and get experience from the system, from the character, for probably display purposes mainly. Don't want to do that one yet. We want to do the same thing for get level and get points. And then we're going to be able to want to get attributes and so forth. So we'll come back to get level and get points. They're very simple. They're just like this. I'll just put those together for those two. We want to do get attribute by get stat by ID. So we'll come up here again to functions, and we're going to call this function get stat by ID. Now that ID is that ID enumeration that we created. So that's one of the input. That's the input, is the stat IDs. So that's what's coming into this, and what it's going to do is take this stats array, we'll get it, and what we're going to do is search through it. We're going to do a for each. This is a for each loop. There's no need to break because we're just going to return. And we're just going to plug this right into the exec on that. And this parameter, what did I call it? Oh, we need to call this stat ID. So there's our stat ID. This is the element that comes out. And actually what we can do here, actually we want to return this. This is the value we want to return. So what I'm going to do is come down here and I'm going to do a break stat so that we can get this this part out but still have the element available to return, which reminds me we have to have an output value. And the output value is going to be the stat, and its value is going to be stat. There it is, stat. So that's the output, but we're going to output that when this ID, we don't need this open, when this ID here, actually when this, yeah, when this ID over here on our input, stat ID, equals enumeration, this ID, then what we're going to do is a branch. We're going to plug this into here. We're going to take the true out and go ahead and return. Since we do nothing at false, we're just going to loop again. It's going to keep going around the loop until it finds a particular stat that matches this one. And we know they're all covered, so we know we will get a result from this every time. So we compile and save. And we're going to use this in a variety of other functions that we have going on here. So we have that ability to get these functions. One of the things we need to be able to get out of this is the final value, so of any stat. And if you remember our stat structure here, there's a value, there's a plus up, and there's a modifier. So we need to add those three together, but we need to take into account whether or not there's time still on this or not, whether and what we add. But we can just add them all together, because when the time falls to 0, this modifier should get set to 0 actually. So we can go back to our stats component, and we're going to add a new function, and this function is going to be get stat total by ID. All right. Well, we've already got a get stat by ID, and so we could probably use that one. So for an input, again, we need a stat ID, and it's of type stat, which is good. No, we don't want to type stat. We want to type stat ID. Stat ID. There it is. So there's our incoming stat ID, and we can just use this function, get stat by ID, and just plug it into here. But we get the stat. Do we need anything else? No, we don't. So we can split this struct pin on here so we get access to all of these, and the output is going to be the stat. So where's our out? Why didn't we not get an output node? That's odd. Output is a stat. Where's our, I created a function, right? Oh, we don't want the output to be a stat. Oh, that's something else was selected, outputs. Okay, now we need to create an output, and the output is going to be the value, and it's just going to be an integer. So there's our final node. And what do we want to do? Well, we want to take these and do an integer addition, and we're going to hit this little plus button here to add another pin, because these are the three things we're going to add. And then we're going to be returning that just like that. So that'll get that total value of that. All right. Now we got a few other functions to add. They're just getters and setters. We can do the, I'll go through the set modifier because that is going to set it on a particular stat. So let's create another function, and we'll call this set modifier. This function needs an input, and that needs to be a stat ID, and its type will be stat IDs. But it needs another input, and that is the going to be an integer value, and we're going to call it the modifier. And it needs another input, and that is the time in seconds, and that will be a float that it's going to last. So we've got those three values in there. What do we need to do? Well, the first thing, we've got this stat ID. We need to find that, so we need to do a get stat by ID. Well, we can actually turn some of these probably into pure functions, but we'll do this like this for now, and maybe I'll go a little more into pure functions. Now let's do that now. I'm going to delete this. Get experience can be a pure function. I'm going to come over here and check pure on this, and then I'll show you what that does. Add experience can also be a pure function. Get stat by ID can be a pure function. Get total can be a pure function, and set modifier can certainly be a pure function. No, setters, we don't want to do that. Add, we don't want to do it. Just the getters, that's fine. Just the getters are pure functions. Okay. So we've got our stat ID coming in. We want to get stat ID, and now you'll see we don't have a flow through this. Okay, we can just take this stat ID, plug it into here, stat ID, get stat by ID, stat ID. Why doesn't it? This is a stat IDs. This is a, oh, stat ID is not supposed to be an integer. It's stat ID value. Stat ID was supposed to be a stat IDs. Don't know how that happened. Okay, we plug this into here. Now our function gets stat by ID total. You know what? I'm using this also. Was I using it someplace else? There's get stat by ID, get stat total, stat ID goes into get stat by ID. Okay. Now we no longer have that flow through on this one either. So, all right, it's back to add, what is it? Set modifier. All right, so what do we have to do? So we've got our, we need to, we've got our get stat by ID. I don't want get stat total. I want get stat by ID, set ID, and now we've got a stat which we can split. All right, there's our stat that we want to modify. We want to take its this is the modifier. We're setting the modifier, right? Set modifier. So it's the modifier, and we've got a time that we want to set. So what we need to do is make a stat. Make stat. Okay. Here's our make stat, and we need to transfer this to the new stat. The ID across, the value, the plus up. But the modifier, we don't want to bring it across. We want to take the modifier from here. Modifier is supposed to be an integer. What the heck happened? I must have gotten those backwards and didn't notice it. They're close in color. So I want to take the modifier here and the time in seconds to here. So far, so good. I'm going to select both of these and move them up. And then I'm going to double click, make a reroute node just to make this look a little neater. And do the same thing with this one down to about here and about here. There we go. So we can see that clearly. We're taking these inputs, and actually all of this stuff here needs to move down because we're going to come across. We're taking these inputs, taking the slot that we found that it belongs to based on this slot ID. We're transferring everything across to a new stat, and then we're putting in our values into the modifier. Now, what we need to do is go with this stats array. With this stats array, let's wrap it here, get the stats. We need to do a set array element. And I did have a get slot by ID. I have a mistake here. We need to go back to get stat by ID, and it needs to return not just the stat, it needs to have an output of index of type integer, and the index is this array index right here. Plug that in. All right, compile that. Let's go back to set modifier. We've got an index here, and we get that index out of here. So let's put that over here into the index. These get messy, it seems, no matter how you go about this. I can pull this one down here a bit, I guess, and pull this one over here. I guess that looks a little bit better. And here's our stats. Okay, and this is going to go into this. Now what's going to happen is we send these values in along with the slot. We want a modifier, how many seconds. It's going to take the existing one, find all the data. It's going to transfer it across to this new slot. It's going to change these two values in that new, not slot, but that new stat. And then when this executes set array element, it's going to take this index and this item. We got to put this item in here. Almost missed that. It's going to take this item and it's going to put it in that array at the index specified so that the array will be updated with the new values to that. And you're going to see this pattern a lot when working with structs. You have to transfer them across. The struct themselves are not, you can't change them. You notice there's no inputs over here. You can't plug anything into them. So, of course, this is a function. This, rather, is the way you plug stuff into it. If you just come and, like, get this and do a get, you get a copy, and then you can do stuff with that. So we'll go more over arrays as we move along here. So we've got some basic things set up. I think I'm going to have to cut this video a little bit short. This went a little bit long, and we'll continue on in the next video, and we'll put all these functions together. In the meantime, I'll add the rest of the getters in here because I think that's just about all we have left is getters. We did the add experience. We're also going to have a points thing to do. So we'll do some more. So I'll see you in the next video. Okay, well, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. In this video, we pretty much got our stat structure taken care of, and the basic ideas of it, and some of the functions created. We've got a little bit more to do on stats, and so we'll continue on with this and building this up. It gets a little bit tedious, I know, with blueprints, but I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're learning a lot about how blueprints work and how the data structures and data handling work in blueprints. So thanks for watching. If you liked the video, hit that like button. If you really liked it, hit that subscribe button. And if you want to get notifications when I upload videos, hit that notify button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.